Welcome to the Three Things Podcast. I'm David Iglesias, Director of Wheaton Center for Faith, Politics, and Economics. You may be wondering why this podcast is called Three Things. You were probably taught by your parents, like I was, that it was impolite to talk to people about three things: religion, politics, and money. But what happens if your job is to talk about those three things? Well, let's find out. Joining us today in the Three Things podcast is Dr. Marcel Ponton, who is an associate clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at UCLA. He has led various clinics and services for the County of Los Angeles through Harbor, UCLA, for over 2 decades. Currently, he serves at Olive View Medical Center, where he trains pre-doctoral and postdoctoral students. He's the author of multiple peer-reviewed articles and the co-author of 2 books in the area of cross-cultural neuropsychological assessment. That is a mouthful, Dr. Ponton. I'm going to ask you exactly what that means in a minute. He is a fellow of the National Academy of Neuropsychology and the founding president of the Hispanic Neuropsychological Society. He's been working in the field of head injury assessment and treatment for the past 30 years. He is the clinical director of Persona Neurobehavior Group in Pasadena, California, where he focuses on the assessment and treatment of head injured patients. He consults with the multiple rehabilitation hospitals in Southern California and serves as an expert witness in medical legal matters. Dr. Ponton was raised in Venezuela, graduated from Wheaton College in 1981, later received his PhD in clinical psychology from Fuller Graduate School of Psychology, Pasadena, California. Thank you so much and welcome to the Three Things podcast, Dr. Ponton.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you, David.
So we overlapped at Wheaton, but I think you must have been a studious person because I don't remember meeting you until we both graduated.
That's true. I was too busy trying to do the student employment thing and working late at night and getting up early in the morning to go to class.
Wow. Well, as you probably know, I'm also from Latin America. I grew up in Panama and have a lot of family members still there. But I'll tell you, Venezuela is one country I've never visited. I visited virtually all of Central and South America, and I've only known 2 Venezuelans in my entire life. So you are a rara avis, as we say in the legal world. But tell me about your upbringing in Venezuela, because when I think of Venezuela, I think of an affluent country with lots of oil reserves and an educated population. And I know it's not that now. So tell me about how you were raised.
So we were very fortunate to grow up, my siblings and I, to grow up in a country that was flowing with milk and honey, as the scripture says. It was a wonderful time, and Venezuela prospered significantly because of its oil reserves. And in the 1970s, when I was preteen and a teenager, it was a golden time for the country. The country invested in its population by sending about 400,000 students outside the country for specialized training to get master's and PhD degrees at the best universities around the world. And many of those came back. And the reality was that when people came back, they were overqualified, and the people who were managing the positions had much less education, but had more power. And so that created a dynamic of conflict, and a lot of those people who were extremely well educated ended up leaving the country anyway. But despite that, the 70s was a wonderful time with a lot of opportunity, and we were all raised with the notion that the sky was the limit, that we just needed to achieve whatever our potential was. And so it was a very special time. But unfortunately, of course, there was a huge disparity in terms of the income, and the haves were disproportionately rich, and the have-nots were disproportionately poor. And so that created the environment where the social where socialism came in a populist fashion and tried to provide an answer for the ills of the population.
Am I remembering right? But didn't Venezuela begin OPEC, the oil producing organization that has significant power over world economics?
I believe that it was Rodriguez. I can't remember his first name, but he was during the presidency of Carlos Andrés Perez. He was one of the major diplomatic people who went and created this bloc of oil-producing nations that brought the world to its knees. I believe in 74, 75, because they were controlling the output of oil to increase the prices. So, and Venezuela was very much involved at an ideological level, because back then we had what was called the Christian Democrat, or kind of a social democratic government, and and that was that kind of the ideology of managing the national resources to make the foreign companies pay for the use of the natural resources. And so Venezuela was very much involved in that, and they created or they helped create OPEC.
Yeah, so you said 73, 74. Well, I was living in Panama at the time. My parents were missionaries with Wycliffe Bible translators, and I went to high school at the American high school in the Canal Zone. And I remember there being giant oil barrels, empty, of course, but placed in a very public location so that everybody could see how much oil the average American consumed in the zone, as a reminder to please turn your air conditionings up. Please don't use power needlessly. And that left a real impression. I mean, that's almost a 50-year-old memory. And it's funny because a lot of people think OPEC is a Middle Eastern oil producing organization only. But yeah, I mean, I think it started in Venezuela, which is really remarkable. Yeah. So sadly, I think of Venezuela when people say that politics don't matter, that economic policy doesn't matter, because you can see what happened to a country that had so much material blessing. We'll get to a little bit more of that later, but I'd like to know about your spiritual upbringing. Were you raised in the church?
Yes, I was. And, when I was around 12, I met my pastor at a different church. We changed churches, and we went to Iglesia Las Acacias, and I met Sam Olson, who was an MK, a missionary kid who went back to Venezuela. He trained at Princeton and decided to go back to Venezuela to fulfill his calling as a pastor. And I was speaking to him earlier today. He's been a pastor for over 50 years.
Oh my!
Of the same church. And
that's amazing.
Yes, and he's thinking about retiring at this point. But he was clearly a significant influence in my life in terms of being a mentor and a guide and a wonderful friend. And so I kind of grew up in that church and went through, all the activities with the youth. And when I was there, I needed to figure out what I was going to do about my education. And so Sam told me about training in the States, and then the rest is history.
So did you speak English at the time, or did you have to learn it when you got here?
No, I learned English in high school, and much like people in the States learn Spanish in high school. So when I went to college, that's probably you didn't see me around. I was working extra hard, making sure I learned the language well, and it was quite an experience. It's really interesting when you have an ample vocabulary, and then you try to express yourself in a second language, and people are constantly asking you, "What? What do you say? What do you mean?" or they hear what they want to hear,
Yes.
and you feel like you're kind of a little child who cannot really communicate adequately or to a level that conveys all your complex thoughts. So that was quite an experience, and I had to work hard at it. It didn't come easy.
It makes me think of a story when I was on an official Navy trip to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I was given 2 minutes to present a speech to these military officers. And I thought, 2 minutes? I mean, I need more time. So I quickly scribbled something down, and, a standard. I thought it was understandable Spanish. And afterward, the guy raised his hands and said, "Do you speak Spanish?" So I learned a valuable lesson that please prepare. It really helps. So raised in the church. When did you come to faith then?
When I was a child, probably around 4 or 5, I do remember that, my mother prayed with me as a young child, but I really made a commitment when I was 14.
Okay.
And I think that was a critical point.
Absolutely. And did your mentor, was it your mentor that told you about Wheaton College, or was it someone else?
Yeah, actually, it was Sam Olson, who told me about Wheaton College.
So you'd never heard of it? You just that's amazing. So you went thousands of miles to the north based on the recommendations of you. Boy, you must have really trusted him, Marcel.
Yeah, I initially went to Elam Bible Institute, and I was there for a year and a half, and that was really good because he helped me with the language. And then I transferred to Wheaton.
I see.
But yeah, I was clearly at the recommendation of Sam Olson.
Wow. Now, just a couple more questions about Venezuela, because I really want to focus on your professional career, because it's really remarkable. And there are some terms that I want to ask you for definitions of in your bio. But do you still have a chance to visit the country of your birth?
Well, actually, I've been to Venezuela multiple times. I think the last time I went to Venezuela was in 2011. So it's been a long time now. It's 10 years since I was there last. And I look forward to going back. But, like many Venezuelans, it's an interesting predicament where you cannot use your Venezuelan passport because it is expired and there are no new passports that are being issued. And you cannot use an American passport because if you go down, they all ask you for a litany of requirements, and they make it extremely difficult for you to visit. So it's kind of a complex situation, and I've been waiting around to find when is the best time to go back.
Wow. Well, I hope and pray for a regime change without violence, because I understand it's extraordinarily dangerous there, that the crime rates is exceptionally high.
It is.
Yeah. So on a happier note, you could have picked thousands of different fields to work in, to be a professional. And I see that you're in the field of neuropsychology. So how did that happen?
I think it all started again back then when I was in Venezuela during my formative years with Sam Olson. He was during his training at Princeton, he had done some chaplaincy work, and so he was a good counselor. And he was just a very caring, very insightful, and thoughtful counselor. In addition to being a pastor, and so as I was considering, my future, I knew that I wanted to do ministry work, but I also wanted to be involved in psychology. So it was about 16 when I was in the youth group that I decided that I wanted to go into psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did my training in psychology at Wheaton and then at Fuller Graduate School of Psychology. And when I was in my last year of my PhD, I had developed a liking for assessment and the general field of neuropsychology, but I wanted to get more training in it. And so I applied to UCLA, and they had a postdoctoral program. So, here I am, glutton for punishment after
Yeah.
this very stringent training at Fuller. I said, I need 2 more years. And so I went to the Neuropsychiatric Institute, what was then the MPI. Now it has a different name is the Semmel Institute. And I did 2 years of postdoctoral training in neuropsychology, and it completely, impacted my worldview because I was able to understand how assessment can impact the way in which I do treatment. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I got into the field. When I was training, I did both pediatric neuropsychology and adult head injury rehabilitation. And those experiences have accompanied me ever since. I've been seeing the same types of populations throughout these years.
What's a good layperson's definition of neuropsychological? What does that mean?
So neuropsychology is the field of psychology that works at understanding brain-behavior relationships. So we are interested in learning how any form of an acquired brain insult, be it head injury or fall or cerebrovascular accident, impacts behavior. Mm-hmm. But we're also interested in other problems, some developmental issues having to do with attentional deficit disorder or neurodevelopmental delays such as autism and other problems, how the problem is being manifested in terms of the patient's behavior and cognition. So we are able to assess the patient. We administer batteries of tests. We understand what the strengths and weaknesses are, and then we're able to provide appropriate recommendations for treatment or interventions.
Where does the cross-cultural impact come in? Because as I read your bio, you mentioned that you do cross-cultural neuropsychological assessments. Can you break that down for me?
Sure. So, when I was training, I realized that people were testing individuals from different countries whose first language was not English, but they were testing them in English, and they were using the norms developed with an English-speaking population to assess these patients. And so from a purely psychometric perspective, in other words, from the statistical side of the assessment, we started to wonder, is it accurate to obtain an IQ from a child whose first language is not English? And are we obtaining the right number to classify the actual level of cognitive ability of this child or not? And so I think that over time it became clear that culture, language, education has a profound impact on how people perform on the tests rather than the test itself determining a universal level of cognitive function. So you do have to have measures that are sensitive to culture and language. And because of that, I spent a lot of time doing research, developing norms, developing tests, and also working at a larger level with the neuropsych community to bring awareness of these issues to the practice of neuropsychology.
And based on the cultural context, does that affect the treatment that the patient receives?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Can you give me a concrete example of that?
Sure, of course. So, for instance, let's say that we administered language test to a patient, and it turns out that the test came out at the first percentile. All right. Mm-hmm. And so, if you are preparing a treatment plan for that patient, you're going to say, well, we need to focus on speech therapy. Mm-hmm. But if you assess the patient in Spanish and you find out that the patient's language is actually in the low average to average range, so instead of being at the first percentile, is at the 18th to 24th percentile, because his actual fund of word knowledge is in a different language, then you realize that the interventions need to focus somewhere else. So that patient will have problems with memory and with executive functions rather than with language, but you can use the strengths in language mm-hmm. to compensate for the deficits in other areas. So the assessment has to be accurate in the patient's own language so that you can have the appropriate interventions. Otherwise, as we say in Spanish, you will be scratching where it doesn't itch.
So are the majority of your patients Spanish speakers or non-English speakers, or how does that work?
I think we have a large set of patients that come from different backgrounds. We do have patients who speak other languages than Spanish, but a good proportion of our patient population in the clinic is Spanish speaking, and we do have another large proportion of English speaking patients. So it's very balanced in that sense.
Yeah, I've been to Los Angeles many times over the years, and just the number of languages I hear in a typical day is mind-boggling. I mean, it's got to be one of the most linguistically diverse places on the planet, with the possible exception of Manhattan or Greater New York.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the largest concentration of Tagalog-speaking people is here in Los Angeles. The same is true for Farsi-speaking people and Armenians, and so it is incredibly diverse and very interesting and very challenging because we want to, whenever we're providing services, we want to be very sensitive to that diversity.
Exactly. Now, as I understand it, you specialize in the field of head injury, head trauma. How did that come about?
On July 9th, 1991, I had put my little sign on the door that said, Marcel Ponton, PhD, and I sat down at my desk and I was waiting for a call. And a call came in, and it was from Casa Colina Hospital, and they said, we have a patient from Spain who was kicked by a cow.
Oh my.
Apparently he was a dairy worker. And we'd like to see if you can evaluate him and tell us what to do with him. So I ran to Casa Colina Hospital, evaluated the patient, and I was fascinated by whole idea, not only, of course, of providing an accurate assessment, but the fact that I was part of a team. I had trained at a rehabilitation program, but this was kind of the real world. When you're in training is one thing. When
Yes.
I remember after that case that the most challenging thing was I presented all my findings, and they asked me, so doctor, what do we do with this patient?
Oh my.
From that time on, I realized that I have to have meaningful answers, to direct treatment for patients. And so it has been a wonderful learning experience in many ways. When we get people who have been injured at this level, we get them at their worst.
Sure.
And, their sense of self, their routine, their direction, everything has been broken down and lost. And financially, they're significantly impacted. And so we're there to kind of help, to provide hope, direction, to give them strategies, to teach them how to compensate for problems, to help the family. And over the years, it has been a wonderful experience of learning how people can go through restoration and through rehabilitation, and to how they can be made whole again. So it's really a fascinating journey to be with patients, walk with patients in their journey.
What finally happened to this Spanish dairy worker? Did he make it out okay, or did he have permanent disability?
Well, he was an elderly gentleman, and he did have some, significant cognitive problems, but he was able to, learn some compensatory strategies, and he was able to function independently. Again, he was in his mid-60s, and I remember that he was from the Basque country.
Oh, sure. I've walked through there. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
And so very, very proud man. He wanted to go back to work at age whatever 64 that he was, and so I think eventually worked out that he was able to retire, and he was taken care of. So that worked out well for him. But I kept in touch with him after that. So it was interesting to see that he was comfortable with the idea that he could live without working.
Yeah, that's not something that's common in a lot of the world. Yeah. So as a former Wheaton College football player, I'll tell you, I first became aware of brain trauma when I saw the movie Concussion, which is all about CTE, which affects a lot of our professional football players. Do you ever treat professional or high school or college football players for concussion?
So we have seen a fair amount of NFL players or ex-players, and we have worked with some student athletes, actually some female soccer players.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah, we have done that.
So it's interesting because I think as a football player, I have a natural bias that because you have a helmet, you're more likely to have a concussion. But when you're a soccer player, you have no protection, and you're hitting that soccer ball with just your head. And I guess if you do that enough, it can present a problem to your brain. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that no amount of patting the helmet is going to prevent a concussion. I think that, technically a concussion is the violent shaking of the brain. So if you are in an acceleration, deceleration injury, even with, a seatbelt in your car, just the fact that you stop suddenly, the forces that are involved in that are going to cause some rotation of the brain within the skull, and that movement, that violent movement, can result in a concussion, even when you have not had a direct impact to the head. When it comes to contact sports like football or soccer, the direct impact is going to cause either some concussive injuries or some what they call subconcussive. In other words, they are, what football players talk about as having their bell rung.
Yes, exactly.
Repeatedly. So that type of repeated exposure and contact is going to impact cognitive functioning over time.
Yeah, and I'm happy to report I don't remember ever receiving a concussion, but you would have to talk to my wife about whether she's ever seen any symptoms of that. What are some other occupations that are risky for head injury?
Well, actually, a lot of the occupations in construction are very risky. I was seeing a patient that, had fallen while building a bridge. I had one patient that was on a scaffold some 2 floors up, and the scaffolding, broke, and he fell down. And so construction is actually a very dangerous place. And, of course, sometimes there are falling objects, and even when people have hard hats on, they could experience injuries from, heavy objects that fall. So I think that's actually, so paradoxically, teaching is a dangerous profession, especially, I've seen a fair amount of
really
teachers, yes, who are dealing with problem children in kindergarten, and they get headbutted. Yeah.
I would have never even thought of that as an occupational risk. Wow.
And of course, one of the teachers I work with was walking, and somebody kicked a basketball and hit her on the head. Another teacher fell off a desk while putting something up and hit her head. Another teacher was walking in the classroom, and she fell because there was some soda or whatever, and she slipped and fell. So really interesting to see that teachers are exposed to this. But generally, construction, a lot of truck drivers, of course, and
sure,
will have accidents. So, and police officers and first responders have a lot of, there's a lot of potential for them to experience some form of head injury.
So how much improvement can a typical head injury patient hope for?
I think that it is important to know that something will always be lost. And I think it's important to accept that. I was watching again the Jason Bourne movie,
Yes.
Jason Bourne just backs out of a parking lot 3 floors up and falls down, and then he just kind of shakes his head and moves on, and nothing has happened. At the end of the movie, he has a little Band-Aid on his forehead, and then he lives on to the next movie where he's going to do something even more dangerous. I think that we have these fantasies about recovery where you can just go back to the way you were. Depending on the type of injury you have, if you have a mild, complicated, but there are 3 types of head injuries: mild, moderate, and severe. And within mild, there's one called mild complicated. And what that means is that there has been a short loss of consciousness, but there was some bleeding in the brain, or maybe there was a fracture to the skull. And so typically mild, moderate will eventually turn into moderate, or will be considered moderate. And people who have those types of more complicated injuries are going to lose something. And that could be either some cognitive skill or ability, or they're going to lose some ability to function socially or behaviorally, where things are not the same as they used to be. And so many people have a very hard time accepting that they are different, or that, their irritability and their impulsivity now reflects their injury. They rather think of it as something that is going to go away. And if they do not accept the loss, they're going to have a very hard time functioning. So you always are going to lose something. I think that's very important. Number one. Number two, it is critical to have access to treatment and to work with a team that has, depending on the severity of the injury, of course, you need a physiatrist, a physical medicine and rehabilitation doctor, as well as the ancillary therapies, speech, occupational and physical therapy, and then, of course, neuropsychology to help with the emotional adjustment, with education, and with cognitive remediation after the intensive part of the rehab is over.
That sounds very, very emotionally intense. How do you integrate your Christian faith and beliefs in this practice? Because it sounds like you're dealing with people who have just suffered a significant injury, and they may not want to admit that it'll never be the same again. So how do you give them hope?
I think that the first thing is that you have to be patient-oriented. The other day, a patient was late. He was taking his sweet time to answer my questions, and I was just annoyed. I was really annoyed. I said, I have patients who are waiting for me, and I'm going to have a wait list until August of this year. And here it is, this patient, is coming late. He's giving me a hard time. What's going on? And then I just, took a breath, and then I started listening to his story. And I'm telling you, at the end of the interview, I was so moved and impacted.
Wow.
By the loss and the pain that this person is going through, that I was totally moved to be an advocate for his situation. And so it's I think that it is so critical to be able to truly listen and look at the patient in terms of their needs. And so I think that's a way in which your faith comes into place, that you are focusing on serving this patient.
Right.
These people being a servant.
It sounds like being empathetic is a critical skill as well for somebody of your profession, that you have to be able to try to see things as they see, feel things as they feel, and put yourself in their shoes, which a lot of people can't do. But it would seem to me that in your line of work, it would be critical.
It is absolutely critical. And, it is kind of not something that can be taken for granted. I mean, as you know, I've been training people for a long time, and the quality of the students has changed. And, many students nowadays are interested in following manuals and doing things manualized, for cognitive behavioral therapy, rather than really focusing on the patient. So I think that this issue of empathy, is something that we have to learn. It's something that we have naturally. And, if you don't have it, you probably shouldn't be in this field.
Yes.
But I unfortunately, I do see some, as an expert witness, I do see some cases in which the other expert has really no empathy whatsoever for the patient's plight. So,
what advice would you give to Wheaton students who are interested in brain injury as a clinical practice?
I would say that they probably should work at a rehabilitation hospital, and they should focus on the treatment. Neuropsychologists nowadays want to do only testing, but of course that's important, but you really want to be able to treat patients and be able to make a difference in a patient's life.
Yes.
So if you are willing to, spend the time learning about head injury and working with patients and treating them and treating their families, it's going to be an extremely rewarding career and an extremely rewarding experience, because you will be able to see how, the lives of these patients change over time, and you can be part of that. You can that can be your ministry, contributing to the rehabilitation of these patients. So I think it's a wonderful experience, and it's certainly a way to serve the Lord.
It sounds like if you were to do it over again, you wouldn't choose another field.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's wonderful hearing people say that. Dr. Ponton, please pass my best to Sylvia. I have very fond memories of her from college, and blessings on your family. And thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure talking to you. We'll hopefully see you when I'm back at Wheaton sometime.
Amen.
You have been listening to Wheaton's Center for Faith, Politics, and Economics podcast, 3 Things with host David Iglesias. Join us again in 2 weeks for a new interview with an accomplished faith, political, and business leader.